No one standing by that lake understood why the mother elephant had gone wild. She left her herd behind and charged into the deepest water, again and again trying to save something no one could even see. But when the truth finally came into focus, everyone on that shore went pale. Because that elephant was not just trying to rescue a small life from the middle of the lake. She was desperately fighting to get back the child she loved more than her own life. Dawn spread slowly over the northern Botswana ranch, turning the grasslands silver before warming them into gold. The air still held the cool breath of night, and for a few fragile minutes, the whole reserve seemed suspended between sleep and waking. Far beyond the fence lines, the marsh shimmered like glass, and the world looked too peaceful to be carrying bad news. Evelyn Carter stepped out of the field cabin with a weathered notebook under one arm and a thermos of black coffee in her hand. She had worked enough dawn patrols to trust the rhythm of a place before she trusted her own thoughts. Most mornings, the elephants announced themselves long before she saw them. This morning, the silence reached her first. Rosie usually led the herd into view just after sunrise, broad-shouldered and steady, moving with the unhurried authority of a creature that knew exactly where every life around her belonged. Even from a distance, the others oriented themselves around her. Calves drifted less when Rosie was near. Younger females settled faster. The entire herd seemed to breathe in her tempo. She was not the oldest elephant Evelyn had ever studied, but she was the one she trusted most. Rosie had survived poachers, drought, and relocation, and yet there was a gentleness in her that never made sense beside the old scars across her flank. She could stop a squabble with one low rumble. She could calm a frightened calf with the lightest sweep of her trunk. That morning, Evelyn followed the usual path toward the east meadow, expecting to find the herd spread loosely near the water, as they did almost every dry season dawn. Instead, she found impalas frozen at the edge of the brush, necks lifted, ears locked toward the lake. A cluster of crowned lapwings burst from the reeds all at once, shrieking into the pale sky as if something had broken the order of morning. She stopped walking. It was not fear exactly, not yet. It was the sudden feeling that the land had shifted 1 inch out of place. The low, conversational rumbles of the elephants were absent. No tearing grass, no soft splashes. Even the insects seemed to hesitate. Evelyn set down her coffee on a stump and listened harder, until the quiet itself began to feel like a warning. When she reached the rise overlooking the grazing flats, the herd came into view at last, but they were packed too tightly together, a rough gray knot instead of their usual loose crescent. Several adults faced the lake rather than the grass. One juvenile swayed in place, then nudged another female with restless urgency. A calf made a thin sound Evelyn had only heard when mothers strayed too far. She counted once, then again, slower. 8, 10, 11. The number caught in her chest before her mind would accept it. Rosie was missing. The emptiness where the matriarch should have been was strangely visible, as if the shape of her absence had weight. The others were not feeding. They were waiting, and whatever they were waiting for was pulling the whole herd taut. A young bull named Jasper shifted from foot to foot and let out a tense, breathy rumble toward the lake. One of the older cows reached her trunk across a calf's back as though trying to keep the little one from bolting. Evelyn had seen unrest before, storms, predators, injuries, but this had a different texture. It was not chaos. It was dread, contained and growing. She crouched beside a termite mound and lifted her binoculars. The lake was still wrapped in strips of mist, its far edge blurred by reeds and low morning glare. For several long seconds, she saw nothing but dark water, drifting branches, and the shimmer of light spreading across the surface. Then, near the opposite bank, something massive moved where no elephant should have been standing alone. It was Rosie. Even at that distance, Evelyn recognized the slight notch in her right ear and the heavy slope of her shoulders. But the calm authority that defined her was gone. Rosie was turning sharply, stamping at the mud, swinging her trunk in abrupt, furious arcs. She looked less like a leader and more like a mother that had lost sight of something she could not afford to lose. Evelyn lowered the binoculars, then raised them again, hoping the second look would make more sense than the first. It did not. Rosie's head jerked toward the water, then back toward the reeds, then down again, as if she were trying to follow something moving just beyond sight. A deep sound rolled across the lake, raw, strained, and unlike the grounded calls Rosie used to steady the herd. That was the moment the cold truly reached Evelyn. Rosie did not sound angry. She sounded desperate. Behind her, the herd on the near side answered with uneasy rumbles that never quite formed a chorus, as if they were listening for instructions their leader could not give. The sun had finally cleared the horizon, bathing everything in gold, but the morning felt darker than when it began. Evelyn stayed very still, one hand gripping the binoculars so hard her fingers hurt. Across the lake, Rosie stepped forward into the shallows, then stopped, trembling with focus. Whatever held her there was in the water, hidden from every eye except hers. And as the herd waited behind Evelyn in strained silence, Rosie leaned farther toward the lake, as if the next second might demand everything from her. For one suspended moment, nothing moved except the mist sliding over the lake. Rosie stood in the shallows on the far bank, every line of her body pulled tight with a kind of terrible attention. The sunrise had turned her skin bronze at the edges, but there was nothing warm in the way she held herself. She looked braced against something no one else could yet see. Evelyn stayed low behind the termite mound and kept the binoculars pressed to her face. She had watched Rosie through storms, injuries, and the uneasy first weeks after relocation, and she knew the difference between caution and panic. This was neither ordinary alarm nor temper. It was urgency sharpened into action, the kind that rose when time was running out. Across the meadow, the herd felt it too. Jasper gave another strained rumble, then fell silent as if he were waiting for Rosie to answer. One of the younger cows reached toward the lake with her trunk and then withdrew it, uncertain. Even the calves had gone still. The whole group seemed to be listening with their bodies, pulled toward their missing matriarch. Rosie took another step forward. Water climbed her legs, darkening the dust on her skin. She lowered her trunk to the surface, swept it once, and lifted it again so quickly that spray flashed in the light. Then she stamped, hard enough to throw mud behind her, and let out a deep, raw call that rolled across the water and struck the near bank like a warning. The sound hit Evelyn in the chest. Rosie was not calling to the herd. She was calling to something ahead of her, something beyond the reeds and the reflection of morning sky. Evelyn adjusted the focus and searched the waterline for movement. A branch drifted. A bird lifted off. Rings spread and vanished. Still, Rosie kept looking at one fixed point with unbearable intensity. Then the matriarch moved, not with her usual grounded strength, but with a sudden burst that looked almost reckless. She lunged farther into the lake, splashing chest deep, then halted as if she had lost footing in the soft bottom. Her trunk shot high, tasting the air, then lowered again toward the water. Every motion carried the same desperate purpose: reach it, find it, save it. Evelyn's breath shortened. Rosie never entered this section of the lake unless she had to. The far basin dropped fast after the first shelf, and even the staff kept clear of it during the dry season. There were old channels there, hidden in the murky bottom, and pockets of slick mud that could grab a truck tire. Rosie knew this water. That was what made her choice so frightening. For a second, the elephant seemed to hesitate. Her front foot searched under the surface, then slid. Her massive body dipped lower, and Evelyn felt a burst of helpless fear so sharp it made her stand. But Rosie caught herself, widened her stance, and shoved forward again, as if the danger beneath her mattered less than whatever waited farther out. The herd answered with broken, uneasy rumbles. The lake exploded. Rosie drove into deeper water with a force that sent white spray fanning around her shoulders. Birds tore up from the reeds. Flock of guinea fowl scattered from the near shore. Waves rolled outward in widening rings, slapping the mud banks and rocking the floating branches loose. On the ridge behind Evelyn, one of the calves cried out, thin and frightened. Now there was no doubt. Rosie was not cooling off, not playing, not crossing. She was charging into the deepest part of the lake with the blind determination of an animal that believed one more second might mean loss. Evelyn tracked her through the binoculars as the matriarch's broad back rose and fell against the water, each powerful stroke aimed at a target still hidden from human eyes. For one heartbeat, Rosie disappeared in the glare. Then her head lifted again, ears pinned back, trunk extended low over the surface as if she were trying to reach something just out of range. She made a sound Evelyn had never heard from her before, a hoarse, breaking rumble that carried none of a leader's authority and all of a mother's fear. It left the morning feeling shattered. Evelyn lowered the binoculars and turned toward the trail, already moving before she had fully made the decision. Someone had to help. Someone had to see what Rosie was seeing before the lake took it away. Behind her, the herd remained fixed at the meadow's edge, held in that terrible waiting. Across the water, Rosie kept pushing forward, one relentless stroke after another. When Evelyn glanced back one last time, the sight burned into her. Rosie was alone in the widening gold of the lake, half swimming, half fighting the water, drawn by a need so fierce it had overruled every instinct for safety. The calm of dawn was gone. In its place was a single, dreadful truth. Whatever Rosie was trying to save, it was still out there. Evelyn ran hard from the ridge, boots striking the packed earth of the service trail, while the morning behind her seemed to split into two worlds. One was still beautiful. Gold light, open sky, birds lifting over the reeds. The other had narrowed into something urgent and merciless. Out on the lake, Rosie was still fighting the water, and every second now felt expensive. The operations station came into view through a stand of fever trees, its tin roof already catching the sun. A supply truck sat parked beside the fuel shed, and a radio crackled somewhere inside with the ordinary language of gates, feed schedules, and fence checks. The normalcy of it all made Evelyn's pulse feel even louder. Nothing at the station matched what she had just seen. Tyler Brooks was the first person she found, crouched beside a stack of storage bins with a clipboard in one hand and a half-zipped field vest hanging from one shoulder. He looked up with the distracted expression of someone expecting a routine question, then straightened when he saw her face. Evelyn did not waste breath on greetings. She told him Rosie had gone into the deep basin and was trying to reach something. For a moment, Tyler just blinked at her, trying to fit the words into something reasonable. Rosie? In the deep water? He let out a short, nervous laugh that died almost instantly. He had only been at the ranch 3 weeks, long enough to admire the elephants and memorize protocols, but not long enough to understand the weight of one animal breaking its own pattern. To him, what Evelyn described still sounded improbable, not dangerous. She might just be cooling off early, he said, already regretting the weakness in his own voice. Or chasing birds, or pushing driftwood. They do weird things sometimes, right? The sentence landed between them and failed on contact. Evelyn stared at him, breathing hard, and Tyler's confidence visibly thinned. Somewhere behind the station, a generator kicked on with a low, mechanical groan. "They do not do this," Evelyn said. Her voice was low, but it carried more force than shouting would have. She told him the herd was packed tight on the meadow instead of grazing. She told him Rosie was vocalizing in a way she had never heard before. She told him the matriarch had entered the one part of the lake every seasoned ranger avoided unless there was no other choice. Tyler shifted his weight and glanced toward the office door, already searching for someone older, someone who could decide whether this was panic or expertise. That was when Marina Holt stepped outside with a tablet tucked under her arm and sunglasses pushed up into her hair. She had spent years keeping remote field sites functioning, and it had made her practical in ways that often sounded cold to people in crisis. Marina listened without interrupting, but Evelyn could see the caution settling into her face. The deep basin was unstable. The mud shelves collapsed without warning. 2 crocodiles had been sighted there late in the last wet season, sending people in blind, based on a partial sighting and a distressed elephant, would violate every safety rule she was responsible for enforcing. Her first instinct was not disbelief, it was containment. "You're asking me to launch an emergency response without a confirmed victim," Marina said carefully. "We don't even know what Rosie is after." Evelyn opened her mouth to answer, but Marina continued, not unkindly. "If we rush in and that elephant turns defensive in open water, we could lose a boat, a person, or both. I'm not dismissing you. I'm trying not to make this worse." The restraint in Marina's tone made the delay feel even crueler. Evelyn wanted to grab her by the shoulders and force her to look through the binoculars. Instead, she described Rosie again, slower this time, with the precision of someone presenting evidence in a room that wanted excuses. The pinned ears, the abrupt turns, the direct line into deep water, the sounds from the herd, the way the calves had gone quiet. Tyler had stopped pretending he was unconcerned. He stood with the clipboard hanging useless at his side, listening now with a pale, uneasy focus. But Marina still hesitated, not because she thought Evelyn was wrong, but because she understood exactly how fast a bad decision on open water could become irreversible. Procedure, experience, fear, and reason were all wrestling inside her, and none of them made the clock stop. Then the radio on the desk inside the office snapped with sudden static. A ranger from the south sector came through, breathless and clipped, reporting that the elephants near the lake had shifted again. The group was no longer holding its ground. Several adults had started edging toward the shoreline, bunching the calves inward. Even over the radio, the urgency in his voice was unmistakable. The herd was changing because Rosie was not coming back. That report hit the room harder than Evelyn's words had. Herd behavior did not escalate for nothing. Marina's eyes moved to the open doorway, then back to Evelyn, and something in her resistance cracked. Not all the way, but enough. "If this is real," she said, "we need someone who knows that water and knows how an elephant moves when it's protecting something." She did not say the name. Evelyn already had it. Walt Mercer was down by the transport bay, checking tie straps on a flatbed trailer as if the morning belonged to ordinary work. Former river rescue, former flood response, former anything that required keeping his head while other people lost theirs. He wore experience quietly, like a coat he had stopped noticing years ago. Evelyn turned before Marina had fully finished speaking and headed for him without waiting to be dismissed. Behind her, the station had changed shape. Tyler was calling for binoculars and lake charts. Marina was reaching for the emergency key box, even while arguing into the radio about boat fuel and med kits. The ranch had not become action yet, but it had become motion. And out beyond the fever trees, where the sunlight widened over the water, Rosie was still out there, alone, relentless, and running out of time. Walt Mercer was at the transport bay with one boot braced on the trailer rail, tightening a weathered strap through a steel latch. At first glance, he looked almost too calm for the kind of man people ran to in emergencies. But Evelyn had learned that with Walt, stillness usually meant he was already thinking 3 steps ahead. She reached him breathless, and he knew at once this was not routine. He set the strap aside without asking her to slow down. Evelyn told him everything in one hard stream. The herd clustered tight at the meadow, Rosie missing from formation, the sounds coming across the lake, the sudden plunge into the deep basin. She described the way Rosie had moved, not wandering, not bathing, not crossing, but driving herself forward as if something in the water mattered more than her own footing. Walt did not interrupt. He listened with his head slightly bowed, eyes narrowed against the growing light, one hand resting on the trailer gate. The more, Evelyn said, the more the lines around his mouth changed. By the time she finished, he was no longer hearing a strange animal story. He was hearing pattern, instinct, and threat aligning in a way that stripped all comfort from the morning. An elephant doesn't abandon stable ground for deep water unless something inside her says the risk is smaller than the loss, he said. His voice was quiet, but it landed with the weight of certainty. Then he looked straight at Evelyn. She's not swimming for herself. She thinks someone's out there. The words sent a chill through her, not because they were dramatic, but because they matched what her gut had already known. He moved fast after that, though nothing about him looked rushed. He grabbed a handheld radio, called for the lake skiff, then told Tyler to bring the soft mesh rescue net from storage instead of the heavier one used for antelope extractions. To Marina, he asked for thermal blankets, a trauma kit, and the portable heater unit. The station, which had hesitated only minutes before, began to take shape around his certainty. Tyler returned carrying binoculars, coiled rope, and more fear than he wanted anyone to see. Marina unlocked the emergency cabinet and started handing out supplies with clipped efficiency. Her earlier caution now transformed into action. Walt checked everything with a glance that missed very little. Fuel level, oars, tow line, medical case, backup battery. He was building a response the way some men built shelter, piece by piece, with no wasted motion. As they crossed the yard, a dusty pickup rolled in from the west fence line. Grace Nolan stepped out before the engine was fully off, one hand on the door and the other shielding her eyes from the sun. Grace had worked the ranch longer than almost anyone still there. She knew the habits of the animals in ways that never made it into reports, because animals often revealed things to patient people they hid from structured observation. Marina gave her a quick version of the emergency, but Grace's attention locked on Evelyn when she heard Rosie's name. "Did you say the deep basin?" she asked. Evelyn nodded. For a brief second, Grace looked not surprised, but unsettled, as if a private worry she had never voiced had suddenly stepped into daylight. She hesitated, then said there was something they needed to know before they reached the lake. Over the past 2 months, Grace had seen a small vervet monkey slipping in and out of the outer edge of the herd's range, not once or twice, repeatedly. At first, she assumed it was scavenging fallen fruit or following insects kicked up by the elephants. But then she noticed it near Rosie more than near any food source, on termite mounds, in low branches, once even sleeping in a marula tree above where Rosie had chosen to rest. Tyler let out a disbelieving breath. A monkey shadowing an elephant was odd enough. But Grace went on, quieter now. She had seen Rosie pause beneath that same tree at dusk and wait while the little thing climbed down on its own. She had seen the matriarch stand between it and a jackal one windy evening. She had not reported it because it sounded absurd and because the monkey always vanished before anyone else arrived. Nobody spoke for a moment. The yard noise seemed to fall away around them. Evelyn felt the pieces inside her begin to shift into a shape she did not yet want to name. A small creature. Rosie's desperation. The direct line into deep water. Something she was trying to reach, not attack. Grace looked toward the lake as though the memory itself were dragging her there. "If it's that same one," she said, "Rosie may think it's hers to protect." The sentence changed the air. Tyler looked suddenly sick. Marina pressed her lips together and handed Walt the final radio without comment. Walt did not argue with Grace or ask for proof. He only nodded once, sharply, as if one unknown had finally become a working theory. "Then we're late already," he said. He told Hannah Reed over the radio to meet them at the shoreline with the warming kit and airway tools. They loaded the skiff trailer with the last of the gear and moved out in a tight convoy toward the lake road. Dust rose behind the truck tires and drifted low across the grass. On the way, Evelyn kept seeing Rosie in her mind, not as the broad, steady matriarch the herd depended on, but as she had looked in the binoculars, wild-eyed, straining, and terrified of one point on the water no one else could yet understand. When the shoreline came back into view, the morning seemed to hold its breath. The herd was no longer where Evelyn had left it. They had edged closer to the water, calves hemmed inside a gray wall of bodies, and far across the bright surface, Rosie was still there, still battling the lake with the brutal focus of an animal that had chosen one life over every instinct telling her to turn back. By the time they reached the shoreline, the sun had climbed high enough to burn the last strips of mist off the lake. What remained was harsh, glittering light and a broad stretch of water that suddenly felt too exposed, too open, too deep. The herd stood farther down the bank now, packed tightly and restless. No one fed. No one wandered. Every elephant on shore was turned toward Rosie. Walt took the binoculars from Evelyn and steadied them against the frame of the truck. For a long moment, he said nothing. Tyler hovered nearby, trying not to look afraid, while Marina unloaded gear with clipped, efficient movements. On the far side of the basin, Rosie's back rose and fell in the water. She was no longer charging wildly. She was holding position, circling in a narrow pattern around something too small for the naked eye. "What do you see?" Evelyn asked. Walt adjusted the focus, then lowered the binoculars just enough to answer. "Not enough yet." He handed them back, and she lifted them with shaking hands. At first, she saw only fragments, ripples, glare, floating reeds, a dark shape caught between bands of reflected sky. Then the shape shifted, and the shift was wrong for driftwood. It was alive. It was trying to hold on. The thing bobbed low in the water, nearly lost each time a wave rolled over it. A branch or broken limb floated beside it, waterlogged and turning slowly, and whatever was there seemed wrapped around that scrap of wood with fading strength. Evelyn tightened the focus until her eyes watered. A tiny arm, a wet, narrow face, a tail dragged half-submerged behind the branch like a strip of black rope. For one stunned second, she could not breathe. It was a young vervet monkey, small enough to vanish under one bad wave, clinging to that drifting branch with the desperate exhaustion of something that had already been fighting too long. Its fur was plastered flat. Its head dipped, lifted, dipped again. Rosie was not circling aimlessly. She was trying to keep the monkey inside the thin ring of calmer water around her own body. Tyler saw Evelyn's face before he saw the animal itself. He grabbed the second pair of binoculars from the passenger seat and squinted toward the basin. When he finally found the right angle, the color drained from him. "Oh my God," he whispered, the words falling apart before they fully left his mouth. Marina turned sharply, took the binoculars from him, and looked for herself. Whatever she had expected, it was not this. The shock lasted only a breath before Walt snapped everyone back into motion. "She's trying to shield it," he said, "but every stroke she makes is pushing more water at that branch." He pointed toward Rosie's broad shoulders, cutting through the basin. The matriarch would edge close, then shift, then correct again, but her own size was turning the surface unstable. The monkey survived each swell by inches, and those inches were disappearing. Then another problem surfaced. At first, it was only a darker seam moving through the reeds on the southern edge of the lake, slow and low and easy to miss if you were watching the wrong place. Walt saw it before anyone else spoke. He extended one arm without turning his head. 9 o'clock from the reeds, he said quietly. Evelyn followed the line of his hand and felt her stomach drop. Something long was gliding just beneath the surface. It could have been a log. For half a second, she wanted it to be. Then the shape altered course too cleanly, cutting through the water with intent. Only the top ridge broke the surface, then vanished again. Crocodile. Not close enough yet to lunge, but close enough to change everything. Tyler made a small, involuntary sound behind his teeth. Marina swore under her breath, and set the med case down harder than she meant to. Rosie sensed danger too, though perhaps not from the same direction. She let out a deep, hoarse cry and surged toward the monkey again, shoving a wedge of water between the branch and the wider basin. The little animal slipped, caught itself, and nearly rolled under. Evelyn felt her whole body tense, as if she could hold the monkey above water through will alone. Rosie's trunk stretched forward, hovering inches away, unable to grasp without risking drowning it herself. Hannah Reed arrived at a run from the far access path, with a field pack bouncing against one hip and a rolled thermal blanket under one arm. She was still pulling on gloves when she reached them. Walt gave her the situation in 5 clipped sentences: small primate, near drowning, likely hypothermic, possible aspiration, immediate extraction needed. Hannah listened once, nodded once, and went straight to unpacking airway tools onto the tailgate. Grace stood a few steps back from the shore, one hand pressed to her chest, staring at Rosie with something close to grief. "That's him," she said softly, almost to herself. "That's the little one." No one asked how she knew. It was in the way Rosie kept trying to place her body between the monkey and open water, the way she called to it, the way she refused to give up ground even as the basin fought her. This was not chance. This was attachment made visible. The lake had become a trap with too many moving parts, a drowning monkey too weak to hang on much longer, a matriarch frantic enough to destroy what she was trying to save, a crocodile testing the edge of the scene. Walt looked from the basin to the skiff, then back to Rosie, calculating approach angles, wave patterns, and timing. "We get 1 clean attempt," he said, "maybe 2. After that, the lake decides for us." Evelyn stared through the binoculars one last time before lowering them. Out there in the hard white light, Rosie stayed with the branch as if the rest of the world had ceased to matter. The monkey's head sagged lower. Its grip loosened, tightened, loosened again. And in that terrible, widening stretch of water between shore and struggle, everyone present understood the same thing at once. They were no longer racing to solve a mystery. They were racing death. Walt moved first. The shift in him was subtle, but the entire shoreline answered it. Tyler grabbed the coiled rope without being asked. Marina dragged the skiff down over the mud, while Hannah cleared a flat section of bank for triage, laying out blankets, airway tubing, and a warming pack in neat rows that looked almost too calm for the panic pressing in from the water. No one wasted another word. Rosie was still circling the drowning monkey, but the pattern had changed. She was tiring. Her strokes were less explosive now, more uneven, and each correction sent a fresh set of waves rocking the branch. The little vervet clung with both arms and one leg, its body nearly horizontal each time the water lifted it. Once, its face disappeared beneath the surface, long enough to make Evelyn's heart stop. Walt pushed the skiff into the shallows with one hand on the bow and the other bracing against the current sliding back from the bank. He chose a narrow angle instead of aiming straight for the monkey, forcing the boat to enter the basin from downwind. "If Rosie reads us as a threat, she'll cut across our line," he said. "If she thinks we're following her lead, she might give us one opening." It was not much. It was all they had. Evelyn stepped knee-deep into the water and called Rosie's name the way she always did during feeding checks. Low, measured, never sharp. The sound felt small against the lake, but Rosie heard it. Her head snapped toward shore for one fleeting instant, ears slicked back, trunk lifted high. It was enough to reveal the fear in her eyes, not aggression, not confusion. Fear so raw it made her look almost unrecognizable. That one glance cost them. The monkey slipped. Its left arm lost the branch, slapped the surface, then vanished beneath the churn. Rosie lunged with a violent thrust of her trunk, trying to scoop it upward without striking it. Water exploded around them. The branch rolled. Tyler swore from the stern. Marina, still on shore, shouted something Evelyn did not hear, because every part of the world had narrowed to that one tiny body disappearing between bright waves. "Now!" Walt barked. The skiff shot forward. Tyler rowed hard while Walt leaned out over the bow with the soft rescue net already half open in both hands. Rosie surged in the same second, not away from them, but across them, trying to get between the monkey and the deep pull of the basin. For one sickening moment, it looked as though her shoulder would slam into the side of the boat and send them all into the water. Evelyn called Rosie again, louder this time, forcing steadiness into her voice she did not feel. Rosie hesitated just enough. That pause gave Walt his only window. He dropped low, reached beyond the branch, and swept the net under the monkey as its head broke the surface in one weak, desperate rise. The little body hit the mesh with almost no resistance, too light, too still. Tyler hauled back so hard the oar blade splintered against the gunwale. At the exact moment the net cleared the water, a hard ripple cut past the skiff's right side. Not a wave, something alive and heavy. Walt twisted, saw the dark ridge just under the surface, and drove the boat hook down into the water with a savage jab. The lake erupted in a flash of scales and mud, then closed again. The crocodile did not strike, but the warning was enough. "Back! Back now!" he shouted. Tyler rowed with wild, uneven force, and the skiff lurched toward shore. Rosie followed so close it seemed impossible she would not swamp them. But instead of colliding, she turned parallel to the hull, matching their speed, her trunk raised and trembling over the net, as if she needed to be certain the small body inside had not slipped away again. Evelyn had never seen an animal hold itself together with such visible effort. When the skiff ground into the shallows, Hannah was already in the water up to her calves. She took the bundled monkey from Walt with both gloved hands and ran for the dry bank. The vervet's limbs hung limp through the wet mesh. Its chest moved, but only barely, each breath separated by an eternity of stillness. Grace covered her mouth. Tyler stumbled out of the boat and nearly went to his knees in the mud before catching himself. Rosie did not come ashore. She stopped chest-deep in the shallows, sides heaving, eyes fixed on Hannah's hands as if the rest of the people, the equipment, the shouting, and even the herd behind them had ceased to exist. Water streamed from her flanks in silver lines. She gave one low, broken rumble that rolled across the mud and sank straight into the bones of everyone standing there. It sounded less like relief than pleading. Hannah laid the monkey on a thermal blanket and began working fast, clearing the mouth, checking the airway, rubbing warmth back into the tiny soaked body while Marina opened the med case beside her. "Come on," Hannah murmured, not to the people around her, but to the creature in her hands. The vervet coughed once, weakly, and a thin stream of lake water spilled from its mouth. Evelyn felt her own knees loosen with the force of it. No one cheered. The danger had not ended. It had merely changed shape. The crocodile was still somewhere in the basin. Rosie was still half mad with fear in the shallows. The monkey was alive, but only just. And as the herd watched from the meadow in tense, breathless silence, the entire rescue seemed to hang on a single, fragile fact. They had pulled the small body from the lake, but they still had not pulled it back from the edge. The shoreline had gone strangely quiet after the rescue, as if everyone understood they had crossed only the first threshold. Hannah knelt over the monkey on the thermal blanket, her hands moving with practiced precision. But the silence around her felt almost reverent. Even the usual chatter of birds near the reeds had thinned. Behind them, the lake glittered under the sun, as though nothing terrible had happened there at all. Rosie remained in the shallows, water streaming from her sides, too intent to notice her own exhaustion. She did not step closer, but she did not retreat either. Every few seconds her trunk lifted, testing the air over the little field station Hannah had created on the mudbank. She looked less like a wild animal now, and more like a mother being forced to watch strangers touch the body of someone she loved. Hannah worked a small suction bulb at the monkey's mouth, then eased him onto his side. A thin cough shivered through the tiny body, followed by another weak spill of water. "Good," she whispered, though the words sounded more like hope than certainty. Marina handed her a warmed cloth. Tyler stood frozen a few feet away, mud drying on his boots, his earlier confidence gone as completely as if the lake had swallowed it. Evelyn could finally see the monkey clearly. He was smaller than she had imagined from the water, no more than a fragile tangle of wet fur, shaking limbs, and impossible vulnerability. His fingers curled and uncurled against the blanket with fading reflex. A dark stripe of soaked fur ran along his spine, and one tiny ear lay flattened against his skull. He looked heartbreakingly breakable beside the enormous shadow Rosie cast from the shallows. The first real sign came in the form of sound. It was barely audible, just a weak, rasping chirr from deep in the monkey's chest. But Rosie heard it before any human reacted. Her entire body changed. Her head lifted. Her trunk extended forward, trembling in the air. Then she answered with a low, rolling rumble so soft it almost vanished under the breeze. The sound did not resemble any herd call Evelyn had heard before. The monkey stirred again. His head twitched toward the lake. One hand dragged weakly across, the blanket as if searching for something familiar in a world that had become noise, pain, and light. Hannah froze for a second, not out of fear, but because she understood instinctively that this exchange mattered. "He knows that sound," she said under her breath, more to herself than anyone else. Grace, standing behind her, closed her eyes. When the monkey managed a second, clearer chirr, Grace opened them and said, "That's Milo." No one corrected her. No one asked whether she was sure. The certainty in her voice came from memory, not guesswork. She stepped closer, keeping her eyes on Rosie. "I've seen him near her for months, sleeping above where she rests, riding low branches when the herd moves. She always slows down when he's close." Tyler turned toward Grace, as if he needed her to say it again in plain English. She did. "He isn't just some animal she found out there. Rosie knows him, maybe better than we ever did." The words landed hard. Marina's face lost the last of its administrative distance. Evelyn looked at Rosie again, at the fixed stare, the refusal to leave, the way every muscle in her body still leaned toward the monkey. And the truth rearranged everything that had come before. Rosie had not rushed into the deep basin because she was curious. She had not stayed because she was unusually empathetic. She had gone into dangerous water with the blind force of terror because she believed Milo was hers to save. The realization moved through the group in silence, but it changed the mood more deeply than any shouted revelation could have. People did not pale because the story became stranger. They paled because it became heartbreakingly clear. Hannah wrapped Milo in a fresh thermal layer and checked his breathing again. The tiny chest rose more steadily now, though each breath still looked like work. "He's fighting," she said. Then, after a glance toward Rosie, she added, "And he's listening." Rosie let out another, low, vibrating call, this one gentler, almost coaxing. Milo's fingers flexed against the blanket. His eyes fluttered, but did not fully open. Grace knelt beside Evelyn and spoke without taking her gaze off the elephant. She remembered one dry evening when a jackal had come too close to the acacia grove. Before anyone on staff could react, Rosie had stepped between the predator and a small blur darting through the roots. At the time, Grace thought she had imagined it. Now the memory returned with cruel clarity. This bond had been growing in plain sight while everyone else mistook it for coincidence. Tyler finally sat down on an overturned supply crate as if his legs had simply given up on him. He looked out at Rosie and shook his head once, slowly. She was terrified, he said, almost ashamed of how long it had taken him to understand. No one answered because there was nothing useful to add. The whole shoreline already knew. Every violent stroke Rosie made in the lake had come from the oldest fear in the natural world, losing a child. Milo gave one more thin cry, and this time his eyes opened halfway. They were glassy and unfocused at first, darting over shapes he could not yet place. Then they stopped. Beyond Hannah's shoulder, beyond the equipment and the waiting humans, Rosie stood in the shallows with her trunk lifted and her whole being fixed on him. Something in the little monkey's face changed. Recognition arrived before strength did, and it was enough to make several people look away. The worst of the danger had passed, but the emotional weight of what they had uncovered settled over the shore like a second heat. This was no longer just a rescue story. It was the exposed heart of a family no one had taken seriously until crisis forced it into the open. And as Rosie answered Milo's weak sounds with those deep, aching rumbles, everyone present understood that the next moment would not simply be about survival. It would be about reunion. For several long minutes, no one tried to rush what came next. Hannah kept one hand lightly against Milo's chest, feeling the fragile rhythm there, while the other adjusted the blanket around his small body. The monkey was breathing on his own now, uneven, but steady enough to hope. Across the narrow strip of mud, Rosie stood motionless in the shallows, as if even one careless step might break the miracle that had begun. The herd had gone quiet behind her, not calm exactly, but watchful in a way that felt almost ceremonial. The younger elephants no longer pressed toward the bank. Even the calves stayed tucked close and still, as though they understood that whatever was happening at the water's edge belonged first to Rosie. The whole morning seemed to narrow into that one suspended space between mother and child. Hannah looked up at Evelyn before speaking. "He's stable enough," she said softly, "but no sudden movement, no crowding. If she comes in, let her set the pace." Evelyn nodded, then stepped forward just enough for Rosie to hear her voice without feeling cornered. She called the matriarch's name the same way she always had in the quiet hours of dawn, low, familiar, and free of fear. Rosie answered at once. The sound that rolled from her chest was deep and trembling, nothing like the commanding rumbles she used with the herd. It was gentler now, almost pleading, threaded with a tenderness so raw it made Tyler lower his eyes. Rosie took one step out of the water, then stopped. Mud clung dark to her feet. Sunlight flashed along the wet curve of her tusk. Her gaze never once left the tiny body on the blanket. Milo heard her before he could fully lift his head. His fingers twitched against the fabric. Then, with the slow effort of something still half lost to exhaustion, he made a faint churring sound and turned toward the shoreline. The reaction in Rosie was immediate. She stretched her trunk forward, not touching him yet, only hovering in the warm air above him, as if she needed to feel his breath before she could believe he was real. No one spoke. Even Hannah leaned back and let the moment unfold on its own. Rosie lowered her trunk by degrees, with a level of care that seemed almost impossible in a creature so immense. The tip brushed the top of Milo's head, then slid along his shoulder, feather-light, checking him the way a mother might count ribs through skin. Milo shivered, then reached upward with both hands and clung to her trunk. That was when the first tears came. Marina turned away and pressed the back of her wrist to her mouth. Tyler stared openly, no longer trying to hide what the sight was doing to him. Grace simply stood with her hands folded against her chest, as if she had been waiting months for the world to finally witness what she had suspected all along. Rosie remained utterly still, letting Milo hold on as long as he needed. When Milo tried to pull himself closer, Hannah looked at Rosie, then at Evelyn, and gave the smallest nod. Slowly, carefully, Rosie curved her trunk beneath him and lifted. Not high, not dramatically, just enough to bring him against the broad front of her face, where he pressed himself into the wet folds of skin as though he had found the only safe place left in the world. Rosie's eyes half closed. Relief softened every line of her body. She began to examine him then, not hurriedly, but with painstaking devotion. Her trunk moved over his back, his tiny arms, the side of his face, even the fragile tail that still dripped lake water onto her skin. It was the same kind of full-body checking Evelyn had seen elephant mothers do with their calves after storms or failed crossings. There was nothing symbolic about it. Rosie was not performing affection. She was making sure her child was whole. The herd responded before any human did. As Rosie turned from the shoreline, carrying Milo close against her trunk, the elephants on the meadow began to shift. One by one they opened space in front of her, not chaotically, but with a strange, instinctive order that made the movement feel almost sacred. A young female stepped aside first. Then Jasper moved back. Even the calves were guided gently inward, clearing a path to let Rosie return through the center. Milo, still weak, leaned into Rosie as she walked. He did not try to climb yet. He simply stayed pressed against her, one arm hooked around the base of her trunk, his eyes half open, but no longer frightened. When they reached the edge of the herd, a younger cow extended her trunk and touched the air near him, then withdrew without challenge. It was not inspection. It was acknowledgement. Whatever he was, he belonged to Rosie, and that was enough. Evelyn felt something in her chest loosen for the first time all morning. The rescue had begun with violence. Spray, fear, desperate strokes in dark water. But it ended here in a silence so full, it hardly felt like silence at all. Around her, the team remained still, watching Rosie disappear gradually into the shelter of her own kind. No one needed to say what they had seen. The truth had already done its work. By the time the herd started moving away from the shoreline, the light had shifted into the softer gold of late afternoon. Rosie walked near the center now, not because she needed protection, but because the others seemed to understand that her place there mattered. Milo rested against her, small and impossibly alive, and everyone on that bank understood why the sight had turned them pale in the first place. They had not watched an elephant save a stranger. They had watched a mother refuse to lose her son. If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments. And if you believe love can exist beyond blood, beyond words, and even beyond species, type Rosie below. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell, because the next story we share might move you even more than this one. Stay with us for more powerful, emotional animal stories you'll never forget.